as a warrior that used to have to fight other tribes hundreds and thousands of years ago is in your blood. And when you don't have a focal point for that energy, it starts to turn inward. So here's another way that addiction comes into, especially the Indigenous heritage. And so now, because we're in a different era, tribes aren't fighting each other. It's like you found a good fight. You found a good place to put your warrior energy. You are made that way.
What a wonderful way to frame it. My partner will say to me, have you played hockey lately? If I haven't done something like that that really kind of gets me going, it starts coming out in other ways.
Into the fire, here we go. Into the fire, head to toe. Into the fire, to be seen. Into the fire, to be.
This is Mark A. Lewis. This is the Sacred Village podcast. Today I have three guests with me. They have been on the show before. We're going to go into new territory. The first guest, Ryan Deneault, we had him as a guest for the very first episode. And then I have two other guests, Ross Taylor and Tara Pinsino, also known as Gaia Sophia. We're going to get into the life of a man who, in a way, brought us all together. I mean, certainly today, because we're going to be talking about him, but in a deeper way, there's a thread here that doesn't exist without Ryan, that connects me to the purpose behind the Sacred Village podcast. So this project, the notion of the Sacred Village, is a connection between the exploration that's happening for me on a existential, spiritual, soul level, heart level, that connects to the divine, and that also connects to the teachings of the Indigenous population, the Indigenous elders, the Indigenous tradition, and the Indigenous ancestors. And so Ryan is a very important piece of that for me. He helps remind me of the importance of that connection, and I get to walk alongside him as he explores his path of reconnecting to that tradition and the energy of that tradition, the spirits of that tradition, and the traditions, that have been planted, like seeds throughout the soil of the landscape that we all walk on. And I would say all across the world, certainly on Turtle Island, North America, South America, but also certainly across the world. It's just not as apparent. And so, yeah, things are happening. We're moving in a direction of reconciliation. And this journey for Ryan began, well, Ryan, I'm going to let you take over. When did this journey of reconnecting to these ways and to your roots begin? And how do we segue into the chapter that connects the four of us on this podcast today?
Yeah, as I've been thinking more and more about this, I think the catalyst for this connection started in 2018 for me. And for me, there were three very significant things that happened in my life that brought me to the realization that I not only didn't love myself, I didn't care for myself. I didn't have a lot of good things to say about who I was as a human being, although I was out there projecting something completely different until this collapse happened. And through that collapse, a very dark addiction resurrected itself in my life. I have 30 years of functioning addiction, and most of that was alcohol induced, but towards the later years, cocaine and crack cocaine became relevant in the addiction. And at the end, they became the primary focus. And so after I had that outer realization that I was looking for all of my acceptance outside of myself. And when everything crumbled in front of me, my foundation of who I was crumbled. And that's what led to the really, really severe addiction. That lasted for about 18 months until about November of 2020, when I had, I believe, the spark of the beginning of my reconnection to source. There's something outside of me on November 4th, 2020 that stopped me in my tracks and woke me back up from my addiction, and really shifted my path. That in that moment, my life changed dramatically. And I went from going in this direction to being picked up and being placed in this spot. And I believe I was sent in this direction with a very different toolkit. That 30 years of addiction became very vital in who I end up becoming. And so the good and the bad and the dark and the light, they're all twisted up for me now, because I don't understand them the way that I understood them prior to this awakening. And so 20 days after that awakening, I end up at the Chopra Center. And the only reason I end up at the Chopra Center is because a very good friend of mine, well, two very good friends of mine, Jason and Cheryl Page from Acres Enterprises here in Kamloops, actually supported me to go to the Chopra Center. They put $40,000 on the line for my healing. And I, you can't ever repay that kind of generosity in that kind of a moment. And so because of that, that shifted for me being able to go to the Chopra Center and be invited into Ross's and Gaia's life and energy. And they end up being a very pivotal part of my healing in that 40 days that I was at the center. But what's really interesting about how we end up here is if I don't ever end up going through that darkness, if I don't ever end up having to recreate my life and come back up from the ashes as I did, I would have never ended up at the Chopra Center. And if I don't end up at the Chopra Center, I don't end up meeting Ross. And Ross is the person that introduces me to you, Mark. And so I never get to meet Mark. And if I don't meet Gaia, I don't have the voice that I have right now. And I can very specifically remember the afternoon when Gaia unlocked whatever was holding me back in my neck. I'll never forget it, because it was the release that happened in that moment was spectacular. And that's the groundwork that began this journey that I'm on as we speak today.
Wow. Can you speak to that, Tara, Gaia?
Yeah. So one thing that stood out is when you said that there's no way that you could repay the two people that brought you to the Chopra Center. Like, your life is the repayment.
Right.
So thank you for repaying them by having a voice in the world. And, an energy like yours is really perfect to be under my hands, because it's when they are ready for an initiation, meaning they are ready to remember who they are. They are ready to embody the frequency of their greatest gift in this earthly realm, right? So before you enter the earth in your oversoul, you have all of these available to you. But how do you offer that into the world? So I feel like my job is to come in and just hold the dignity of who you are beneath all of the layers of how it has expressed itself in this realm for its own survival. Like, this soul is very adaptable to distortion. I don't love myself. Of course you're going to use drugs. Of course you're going to give yourself something that makes you feel good, because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. And so I just come in and I see you underneath that, and I'm simplifying it, but you're also ready to feel that point of connection. So it's like the inside of your blossom now is allowing itself to be touched by something divine. And that just creates the environment for your inner blossom, your inner flower, to start to open up. And when that starts to open up, it's so beautiful. Of course you love it. Of course you love yourself. Like, it's so unique. It is your gift of your unique expression from source energy. And really my job is just to see you there, to witness you, and to love all the parts of you that adapted to survive with dysfunction and distortion, which is not just this lifetime. It's not just your Indigenous heritage. It is the collective. It is the programming of your conditioning from lifetimes. I know that sounds a little abstract, but it's a lot to unfurl all of the conditioning that has us adapting to dysfunction. But when the presence of the divine touches the inner part of your flower and you start to open, then, like you said, all of those experiences become your gift and your voice. And My job was just to mirror that back to you.
Yeah, I agree. It felt like Gaia was walking alongside of me in this new realm that I had not experienced before. Um, and I do agree. I had to be ready to slow myself down to hear the whispers of what was starting to show up. And then it was like Gaia was like nitrous. It was like when I was in her presence, I could like go into these other places much quicker than how it happens on my own. And it was like she was supercharging my experience. I don't know how else to explain that. And then there's another piece that you talked about, Gaia, which was to just sit there and to see what's in behind that and to love that and to just cherish that. And you did that in such a beautiful way. And there was absolutely no sexuality in that. And that's a lot of how I've experienced love prior. And so this was a whole other new realm too, where I could just have this real innocent love for you. And I even struggled with expressing it to you because I felt like it was going to be offside, or I didn't know how to do it because I had never really done anything like that before. So I got to experience that with you as well, which was the catalyst to a much healthier version of how to experience love in the world without the sickness of the sex and the intimacy that is, well, I wouldn't call it intimacy. There's something in our culture that's gotten a bit sick around the physical part of our love for one another. And so it was just really nice to experience that as well. There's also a really interesting part about the relationship with Ross that I would like to explore too. I actually had gone to the Chopra Center for a couple of weeks after I had worked on a project for about 8 years, and I needed a couple of weeks to reset. And funny enough, I was completely addicted when I went the first time, but I didn't see it. So I wasn't there for addiction the first time. I was there just to take a breath and reset myself before I moved on. And when I met Ross that first 2 weeks, I didn't like him. Like
That's
I
awesome.
didn't connect with Ross at all. Ross was he was so soft and he was so different than the men that had been around me. The men around me had been filled with testosterone. And what I didn't find out until later, once I'd really crumbled, was that I wasn't that person. I had become that stronger person because of how the world had treated me. And so I became tougher and tougher and thicker and more addicted as I moved away from who I was as authentically as a human being. The second time I came to Chopra, when I completely realized, where I was, and how deep this darkness had gotten for me, Ross was the light when I showed up, and that softness now I could see differently, and I started to understand that I needed to unpack who I had become to rebuild myself in a little bit different way, and a lot of that was through the guidance of Ross. And I don't even know, Ross, if you know, I don't know if we even had those conversations. It's just what I can see as I look back now. I don't know if we ever even had those conversations of how you were doing that while we were in space together. But we had so many great walks and talks, and like I really dove into both of you in such a wonderful way through that healing experience. And so I want to acknowledge that with Ross as well. And I do find it funny. I love that I can be open like that now, because I love that I could just say what it is. Like, yeah, it's such a beautiful place to even be able to do that too, you know.
And I feel like
Yeah.
we did talk about it in one way or the other. And I definitely, at that time, the first time you were there, I didn't feel a connection with you during that stay. It definitely felt like I supported you and all those things, but I didn't feel like we developed any sort of bond. And there's something else I want to say, because I feel like it's an important distinction on this journey, is that, Gaia's role at the center was to provide massage to clients after they had their therapy sessions. And I think it's important to share that, because Gaia was able to share much more than just that role. And so there was energy healing that was happening. There was all these things being offered, which is part of the uniqueness as well. Like the fact that Gaia was willing to do that, or open to do that in an environment that maybe that wasn't fully supported. I feel that that's interesting as well. Like we had all these people coming together to work at this place, and we all kind of shared our gifts in our own way. And perhaps that was the magic that was happening there at the time, rather than the structure that we were working within. And a structure which, by the way, I have a lot of love for and a lot of appreciation for. it's just really unique. It was a very unique time.
Can you talk a little bit more about that experience with Ryan, like the progression of the relationship when it started maybe a bit colder and then developed into
Sure.
something quite different?
Sure. I think anytime somebody comes back to the center a second time, there's a level of humility that comes along with it. And I feel like that always opens up something. Because in order to walk through those doors, it takes tremendous courage, takes tremendous strength. Like I can't even imagine what that's like. And after seeing so many people go through that experience, I think Ryan came open in a way that he wasn't the first time. And that was how we connected, and that was how we bonded from that place. The other thing was that Ryan was very clear about what he wanted from the experience and how he was going to get it and how he was going to show up. And there was not a moment that I recall that he did not get squeeze every opportunity for all the value that he could get from it. And so, to circle back to what you said at the beginning about paying back, I can't believe for a second that you didn't impact everyone in that group that was there along with you at the same time as going through your own experience, because you were like this leader showing up into, this is how we show up in treatment. This is how we show up in our healing. And that rippled into everybody else that was there. And I think there was a fairly decent sized group at that time. So that progression equals so much more connection than there was the first time.
I'm wanting to hear about the relationship, Ross. If you could go deeper into that, how you see Ryan personally, and yeah, that journey. What does that look like?
Well, I think what was interesting about our connection was that at the time when Ryan was getting close to completing his journey at the Chopra Center, I was also completing my journey at the Chopra Center. And so I did something that I had never done, which was tell Ryan, hey, we need to stay connected. Like we had so many synchronicities and so many ways of connecting that it just was like, we need to stay connected. And oh, by the way, I'm moving to the interior where you live. And there's people I know that I think you need to know. And it was already in my head that Ryan needed to meet you, Mark. And I think some time passed. I think I needed to settle in and get to know the interior before the connection actually happened between you and Ryan. But at some point it did. Yeah, I mean, it felt just really like the right thing to do and the natural thing to do, but it definitely pushed up against all the rules that we were meant to follow.
Well, and I'll just say too that in order for you to be in integrity, you needed to show up as the intuitive person that you are and the conduit that you are effortlessly. How could you not? How could you not fulfill your most sacred role? I mean, I can say that because I connected, with one of my closest friends now that that's a sacred, but it's more than that. It's like addressing, who you are as a soul, like as a part of the, being of service to creation. Rules are meant to be broken sometimes.
I want to go back to, I remember, Ryan, when you came back to the center and you were on my table and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you're here. And, there's something that happens, when someone is authentically ready, everything in the field responds. And it's all hands on deck, full
So
goosebumps
true.
as I say that. I have people come to my office that they hear who I am, what I can do, and they're curious. I'm like, okay, we'll see what unfolds. But I know through experience, if you come with authenticity and a need, everybody's coming. A miracle will happen. It'll blow everybody's awareness out of their comfort zone. And that's what you brought. So everyone organized around it. You, Ross, me, my guides,
It's true.
what would come through. I remember planting seeds for you of what your future is going to look like, because it gave you a lighthouse. It gave you something to grab onto. And because that's what your field created, that potential in the field to come forward. That's how the information came through, because you came with the readiness.
Well, I just forgotten. I can't believe I just forgot this. The animals that showed up when I was
Oh,
when
yeah.
I was on that site, I forgot all about that. They would show up in all these crazy ways. Sometimes they would sit and watch me. When I would be out and I hadn't really experienced that level of connection with the animal world. And
Yeah.
it still happens to me today. When there's a really important
Yeah.
thing about to happen, the ego will come and like
Yeah.
go right in front of my car, or will
Yeah.
like swoop right down above my house, or like it all still shows up. But I had forgotten about that. And I think there is something to be said about being ready and searching for that authentic path, right? And for me, that moment when I sobered up, that moment when, like, I believe that like you said, everyone showed up. I think everyone showed up to kick me up and out and into that new direction. Like,
Yeah.
that was way outside of me. Like,
Yeah.
that there is something there that is
Yeah.
so unbelievably beautiful. It transformed my life,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I always say spirit is the smartest person in the room, just let them orchestrate it and just surrender, just do it.
So
Well, and
true.
it's so funny that we look at this whole thing, because I don't know if Mark had told the two of you this, but I have no recollection of asking for this podcast.
Nope.
and my partner Crystal, she's like, "Oh no, I remember you and Mark having that conversation." I'm like, I have no recollection of this conversation. But again, that doesn't freak me out anymore. I'm like, hey, who knows who was at the driver's seat that day, right? Like, I'm okay with that. And wherever that goes, that goes. But I had to have a moment for myself, because the negative part of my ego showed up when Mark said, "We're having a podcast about you." It was like, ugh. Like, wait, and he goes, "Well, wait a minute, you asked for this." I'm like, I asked for this? So there's this whole battle with my ego that I had to have for like 2 days of like, why would I ask for that? Like, what am I asking for? What do I want out of this? Right. And I had to go through this whole process, which was beautiful in of itself, because I learned some stuff about the positive and negative parts of my ego through the process. But it's just wonderful, because 2 days ago I surrendered. I fully, absolutely surrendered control. And my job now is to do my best at not getting back on that horse ever again.
Yeah.
And so it's funny that happened. And now 2 days later, here's three of the people that are massively involved in me getting to that point. In various stages of this sort of rise back up. So yeah, it's all so beautiful and so chaotic with a purpose, right?
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all meant to bring us to our knees, metaphorically, physically, or figuratively, or literally. That connection with creation, it's the only way that it all makes, I hesitate to say makes sense, because it's not about making sense per se, but there's I just feel the truth in that. It's really, everything is about our relationship with God, or creator, or creation, everything. It's ultimately all about that. So relinquishing control, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, how could you possibly be in control?
Well,
Like,
that's the fallacy of the whole thing, isn't it? Right? Where
yeah,
you think you're controlling outcome because you're fearful of something that might happen, and so you try to control it. So you're trying to, avoid the,
yeah,
the potential, catastrophic moment that your mind is playing a recording from something in your past, right? And trying to
yeah.
get through that and get past that point is, that's my goal right now. That's exactly where I'm at right now, is letting that part go as best I can.
Yeah, and I can't. I'm driving home last night in a snowstorm. I can't just let go of the steering wheel. I'm going to go in the ditch. If I take my seatbelt off before I go in the ditch, I might go through the windshield. So there are like aspects of existence that we need to control to a degree. And I don't, maybe that's not the best word, but it certainly is a word that applies to a degree. So there is a certain amount of, being coherent in our thought and in the steps that we make. So I think but there's a mindfulness thing that comes with it too, like being able to be mindful. And you say like not getting back on that horse, that's going to take a lot of willingness, to surrender, to stay connected to source and to stay connected to your emotions, but also a mindfulness to maybe walk beside the horse, to not stray too far from the horse, and to make sure the horse doesn't go short of water, in a sense. Like, I'm kind of taking liberties with the metaphor, but there is certainly a taking care of that part of us that wants to have control, that lives in a state of fear, that contends with cortisol, contends with adrenaline, contends with fight or flight, like all the things, the stories, the things that come in our mind that we're trying to replay over and over to give us a little bit of direction. So much mindfulness is needed in my experience. So here we have 4 of us here that we're all walking a similar path. What's next? I kind of want to go to Tara. What's next, Tara?
Well, yeah, just listening to what you're saying with like the driver's seat embodiment, like here we are in the body. So we are the embodiment of the divine. But what we're recalibrating is the listening and the doing. Like we're reprogramming that within ourselves of listening and enacting what we hear. So within that, there is a great deep surrender. But we don't leave our body. We don't take our hands off the steering wheel. We don't take our seatbelt off. Like that too is listening. And I think it's like what we hear, the resurgence of the divine feminine. I think that's what it looks like. It looks like the great listening and then using that alchemy of the marriage within to put that into action. And to do that, we confront all the parts of our like shadow self, all the parts of the sediment of our history of ever existing. That means we confront self-doubt. We confront our ego. We confront being seen versus hiding, like all the aspects of the ego that wants to think it's in charge and contrives a whole storyline to keep it in charge. And I think we are building the muscle there, so to make that commitment, what I heard Ryan 2 days ago, like I fully have surrendered. And I think it's a muscle that we build because in our culture, we're not used to living in the alchemy of the marriage within, of the I am, of the Sophia Christ light, of the masculine, feminine. And, yeah, it's like you said, Mark, is that mindfulness of choosing that over and over again until that muscle is tonified and becomes like habitual. And I think we're all expressing that in different ways in our life, but we all have our pulse on the same thing that we're listening to.
I want to segue there before I go to Ross. I want to go back to Ryan because I don't want to lose the horse metaphor. I actually, just as a sidebar, I was gone for 3 minutes. I don't know if anybody noticed because I'm quite still.
No, we did.
So, yeah.
Oh, you did notice? Yeah. Okay. But it kept recording.
Yeah, you were
and
fully
it's doing
gone
its
and we
magic.
just kept going.
Great.
Well, I think it's a great example of divine timing, of listening, of trusting. Our egos wanted to all work together and flow in a very logical sequence. And then there's this other voice in the room that is orchestrating something beyond what we can comprehend with our own efforts, and I think that's the magic and that's the relationship. What I was speaking of before we started recording, it's like we have a new relationship now. It's like I get to ask too. I'm not just in service. Yes, that's true. But I also it's a two-way relationship. I'm going to listen to you and trust when you intersect for the greatest, highest outcome. And I can make requests on that as well.
I think that's very, very poignant. It takes, like, even though I am the person who's holding the space of the interview per se, I'm not in control. And this is really apt. And I felt that coming, like losing the connection, feeling the feelings in my body about, okay, what are we going to do? My mind is trying to repair. And sometimes that's valid, but not in this case. In this case, it's somehow still all held. Like all of this was, I went out, I came back in. I'm learning in this moment through this interview to go with the flow and to be trusting that something divine is taking place. And when I started, for people, I mean, this won't be in this interview, but I'm gonna leave this in the interview, in the podcast. But the opening, we had a 2-minute opening already that we had to stop because we had some technical issues, and then I had to start again. And only when I felt it a little bit, it felt like it was a little bit awkward initially when I first started, but then it segued into something that was I felt it in my body. It was just like core that I needed to state, that I needed to express, which was that connection to the land with the Indigenous elders. And it wasn't in my mind when I began. I had a false start, and that was a paramount. This is just my I mean, it's tricky too, because we can take a step back or afterwards and fill in the blanks and create a narrative about why it was perfect, why it unfolded perfectly anyways. But then a part of us, or me anyways, I'm still doubting, how much of that is made up, and still fighting, wrestling with that bit of control. But it's, I
I,
think it's, go on,
I
because
have a
it is very
funny
apt.
I have a funny one-liner about that. Intuition is everything that happens before the mind analyzes it.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
like, it's just happening. It's divine happening. And then our mind goes in there,
Yeah.
and if before
Shakes it
the
all
mind
up.
comes in there, there's the perfection.
Totally. So with that in mind, if I can really hold that, it's like everything is perfect. Like everything is in, so it's not just a mind thing. I don't need to be in control. Yeah. And I want to get back to the horse thing, but yeah, go ahead, Ryan. And we'll, before we
Just
segue.
quickly, the moment that you left the call, we had a bit of a giggle about it because we'd already had the other technical issues. And then we went right into conversation, and I felt that shift too, where that conversation wouldn't have happened, but was really important. And it
Yeah.
was because you left that it just directed us into this other space. I felt that move when that
Right.
happened.
Right.
Mhm.
And we don't know how spirit's nudging us, we're not supposed to. That's above our pay grade. Yeah. So I had
It's
this
like
concept.
learning how not
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
fight upstream. It's like learning how not
Yeah.
to fight upstream. Yeah.
Totally. Horse. So I'm imagining the Trojan horse. And I'm imagining, because you use that as an example of like the, wanting to give up the horse, of not being in control. And yet I imagine, the concept of the Trojan horse, where it's, I can't remember the name, the Greek town that the Trojan horse was led in, through the gates into the gated
Troy?
fortress. Was it Troy? I guess so. Yeah, I think so. And so there's something about that, Ryan, where all of the warriors were inside, and the buffalo and this energy, this indigenous energy, is inside. And you've been let in the gates of the colonial construct. And now that warrior, that energy, is going to come out. And unbeknownst to everybody, I mean, it's hyperbolic what I'm saying, but I still believe it's a metaphor that works, because there's something about the disguise that you're wearing, that you wear, honestly, because you were shaped a certain way, that's allowing you to get through the gates. So
Yeah, I get through the gates on the
what's,
both sides of the work that I do.
yeah. But when
And
those
then
warriors come out,
this other,
what's next?
well, it's already started to happen, and it shakes the foundation of the areas that I'm in, essentially. From what I'm seeing, I'm still working with it, and it's pretty hard to control sometimes. But yeah, from what I'm seeing, it's going to be a very interesting next number of years for me, working with industry, frontline workers, the stuff that I'm doing right now, community. Yeah, it's those warriors are waiting to come out. Well, they're already with me. I shouldn't say they're waiting to come out. They're already with me. I just don't know when they're showing up. And sometimes I get really surprised by it.
Well, one thing that struck me just listening to you talk about the warrior, Ryan, is that something that I feel in you now, and I felt in you at the center. And during past times, like, I'm going to just give you a little like cosmology. So all lifetimes happening right now, right? So you have Ryan showing up as you are, but within the frequency of your field, it's really all the lives that you've ever lived or will live are still palpable within this now moment. And as a warrior that used to, have to fight other tribes, like it was a way of life hundreds and thousands of years ago, and it is in your blood. And when you don't have a focal point for that energy, it starts to turn inward. So here's another way that addiction comes into, especially the Indigenous heritage. And so now, because we're in a different era where we're not, tribes aren't fighting each other, it's like you found a good fight. You found a good place to put your warrior energy. And that is like, you are made that way. Just like, the Trojans, they were made to fight. The gladiators were made to fight. And when they don't have an outlet for that, it starts to be dysfunctional. And so you've inherently, by adapting to this now era, but still honoring your true frequency, you have found an outlet for that. So it becomes life affirming and helpful.
Oh yeah,
You know
isn't
how
that a wonderful way to frame it? It's funny because my partner will say to me, "Have you played hockey lately?" Like, if I haven't done something like that that really kind of gets me going, it starts coming out in other ways.
yeah.
Like I start getting agitated because it's just too much energy in me, or I don't know. Yeah, it is. It's too much. There's too much energy in there, and I haven't released it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's thank you for that, Gaia. That's really helpful.
Mhm. What about you, Ross? Warrior.
Yeah. Ross has
Oh,
been quiet for a minute.
it
Mhm.
makes me think of your human design, Ryan. I mean, you are so wired to have all of this energy that wants to move out into the world in all the different expressive ways. And so everything we were just talking about lines up with what I see in your human design chart
Mhm.
as well. And it's like creativity and life force and your voice and your way of being in the world. It's like it's all wanting to be expressed. And so if you're out of alignment and that energy doesn't get to express itself, then of course there's going to be a consequence to that.
Mhm.
And I mean, when we did your human design chart, it was like, oh, of course, this makes so much sense now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it was
It's
like
like,
getting
this is where,
confirmation, like, okay, keep going, you're good.
sure.
Right, yeah.
And so
Well,
anytime that we restrict that energy, then we're restricting a flow that's wanting to move.
Yes.
And then we're having to
Yes.
feel that experience.
and it just
And
reminded me, Gaia, of when you did that work on my neck. Because it all comes back to that because my voice wasn't what it needed to be. And you recognized it right away. I remember you saying you have things to say and you're not saying them right now. And then that just opened up this whole thing. And I really believe that's the reconnection. That's the
Mhm.
beginning of the work to reconnect. I was reconnected, I think, during that moment of freeing myself of addiction, but now this is the development of actually having that connection. Not
Mhm.
having them have to like go in and grab me and throw me around and go, wake up, come on, go this way. It's a
Yeah.
much different, it's a much different connection now.
And it's full goosebumps. I mean, again, everything happening in the now moment. So everything that has been stagnant also sits in the body. So it's a combination of some physical touch awareness. And I find if the voice is used to hit the nail on the head, so to speak, like say the exact thing that the body has been withholding, then it just goes whoop. And there it goes. So you'll probably notice that during other sessions, like I talk a lot, even if there's a muscle, like I'll just talk to it as if it's its own little spirit entity. And it just like whoop, like it just allows, it feels safe, it opens. And then when that stagnation isn't there, what are you? You are God expressing itself through form. And now you can move again. Like health is always in motion. So like the most healthy we can be is just in the now moment, unscripted, not repeating anything from the past and allowing it to move through us with love and dignity. And
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, and again, referencing human design, you've got this one channel that is from the ajna, which is all about opinions and ideas. And then it goes to the throat, which is about expressing those ideas and manifesting them. And the channel that you have is about the two energies coming together of opinions and then the precision of expressing those opinions, which if that's not in line, then you're not going to be giving the messages out to the world, right? So it's like when I hear your story and reflect back, it just makes so much sense.
Mhm. I'm going to switch gears a little. I want to go down a path, specifically reconnecting to the Indigenous teachings and where you're at, Ryan. And I want to get feedback from each of us here. But I want to focus on the word appropriation. It came up in an interview that I did a couple of weeks ago. And the word, my initial reaction, because it was from a white guy who struggled working with plants out east and teaching people about plants. And he's come across uh, I guess shaming and with that in that context of appropriation that he doesn't feel is warranted. And I don't know the context, and it's such a vast terrain. But my feeling right away was like, well, appropriation seems, as far as I'm concerned, is a word that is a tactical word. It's a word that would belong paradoxically in a colonial construct, not in a traditional Indigenous construct. My guess is that there isn't a word for appropriation in Indigenous heritage and Indigenous tradition when we're speaking specifically about community spirituality and the origins of, these traditions. But I wanted to get your opinion on that because a lot of people, would say like that's a dangerous thing to say. So, I want to kind of use that word. I don't want to get too hung up on it, but I'd like to use it to delve a little bit further into the landscape of incorporating Indigenous traditions, kind of like as a backbone, the fabric of the earth, and and who's holding these traditions, but that relationship with the colonized person, with the settler, and that word appropriation. So I'll just sort of open the floor. Whoever wants to speak on this, feel free.
Well, really interesting that you brought that up. Just was meeting yesterday morning, actually. I was presenting to the End Land Use Plan working group for a mining project that I'm working on in the interior of British Columbia. I was working with the nations, and we've gotten past the point. We're moving into a place of beginning to trust one another. So the mining company and the two bands that are involved in the project, we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years to get ourselves to a place where we can start to have those more complex conversations, because we've created an arena of trust. And so as we're doing this, they've incorporated their origin stories into some of the application work, some of the monitoring plans, some of the end land use planning. They're now being framed out rather than the colonial construct. We're framing them out in the origin stories from the nation's perspective to shift the lens of appropriate end land use planning. What an absolutely beautiful thing to be doing. And what a wonderful new direction that we're going to go in to bring the land back to a place that, that's appropriate and that honors the traditional values of the Indigenous people that are going to be on the land for generations to come. But what happens when you're incorporating that information into that colonial construct? The potential for appropriation is massive. The potential to just tick the boxes and take the gist of some of the pieces and just incorporate them into your system and go, look at what we've done. We've done such a great job. It's monumental, right? And so we just had this conversation of, as we're doing this, how do we define what we share openly and what we don't share openly, what we write out and what we don't write out, and what is still the nation to decide on how we implement and how we roll out some of these different ways of being and some of these different protocols and customs. And honestly, we don't have the answers to that. I think it's going to depend on the nation, and it's going to depend on who they're working with, and how that relationship gets developed. But there will be times when some of these colonial constructs take information like that, and they will absolutely appropriate it,
So
and
what
not
is
see it for what it is.
what is the term appropriation mean? Why is it necessary to have a word that seems to be specific to Indigenous culture as opposed to just call it stealing? Like, just why have a different word that makes it a tool that can be used as a weapon? Like, it's a word that is weaponized or can be weaponized to have control. Why is that necessary at this time? Is it kind of like a tooth for a tooth, or playing like fire with fire or an eye for an eye? Or is it, I'm having a hard time grasping its value, but outside of the concept, the concept of it being a part of a power structure, that I want to learn a little bit more about the necessity of that tool within the existing power structures today, and how that's important to be able to use the term appropriation as a weapon, as a political word, a word that has that is not spiritual at all, that is solely political and power, or about power. How is that? What's the world here? How does that work?
I find it happens often where, instead of using the term that would just clearly delineate that you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong, gets shifted to a different word that maybe a person doesn't even know the definition of. So you can just say it and it blows right by. You told them, that we're appropriating this, and they just didn't realize what that meant. So it just flies by, and you just keep moving on with your conversation. I find that happens a lot with some of the words that we use. Like, why don't we say that in BC that the government of Canada stole the land from the nations and never signed a treaty? No, instead we say unceded. Well, what does that mean? So now you got to look up the definition. Now you got to figure out what that means. Most people don't even take the time to look it up. So they hear unceded ancestral territory. They have no idea what that means, right? But it doesn't say stolen land, right? Stolen land would be a lot easier for people to define, and everybody would know what that meant every time you said it. So why don't we say it? I think it's just like you said, Mark. I think it's for control, and it's so that we can sort of appease the masses while we're stealing.
So it's
I just want
not.
to add, it says this
Yeah.
same. I just want to add, it's the same with the word reconciliation. That languaging makes the assumption that two parties were at fault here and they need to reconcile. It doesn't take responsibility and accountability to the one that actually was the aggressor. And it's language. It creates a narrative and it settles the people, right? If like we actually use the language Ryan's speaking of, there would be a lot of unsettled people across Canada. And then how do you keep unsettled people, dysregulated people under control? There's an uprising.
So
the
to use,
language sedates the population.
Right. And so to use the word steal, is it something that is just, maybe people hear that word and it feels like a fairy tale, like a story. It's not really applicable to me. It's exaggeration. It's hyperbolic. Well, where appropriation has a lot of power now. The word appropriation kind of stops everyone in their tracks. Like it connects to cancel culture and possibly connects to sort of the energy of the divine feminine coming into maybe both. But it has a lot of weight and it can be weaponized inappropriately and appropriately. But but is it to soften the concept of something actually literally being stolen and having to repair that? Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation.
Well, if you take that a step further, Mark, it becomes even more interesting when you think about how our society now views the people that we've oppressed. And so if you look on Turtle Island, what do people think of Indigenous people? That they're alcoholics, they're addicts, and they steal stuff all the time. They steal stuff all the time. When you look at African Americans, generally how they're perceived on Turtle Island, they're thieves, they're robbers, they're drug dealers, they're stealing things from you. We don't use different words when we're talking about the oppressed. We are very direct about how we view them. And we view them as less than and people that are dirty and people that take from us when we're the ones that did those exact things to those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
but now we've turned them into the criminal.
It helps me understand this because from my point of view, it feels like, well, it should be called stealing because then it's balanced. You stole this, I stole that. But what I'm hearing from you and what's landing for me is that we're not starting on a balanced playing field. So this plays into the concept of the word or the term anti-Semitic. To say anti-Semitic as opposed to just saying racist or prejudiced makes it a term that is very specific and makes the individual who's Jewish somehow special. They deserve a term that is more jarring, that is more cutting, that is more important, that's more vulnerable than anybody else. Why do they get a special term? What makes them special? But I think what you're pointing out, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that it is a power game, and it's these words and the emphasis of these words and the mythology that's cultivated around these words is a part of the game that begins with an unbalanced power dynamic, and it is a the fingernails up the side of the hill in order to regain a solid ground with your opponent. It's a fight. Like the necessity to fight culturally, like as human beings, like the people that first came, the settlers that came here, how they fought with each other, how they fought with the Indigenous before colonization in Europe, the tribal conflict, the fighting for territory. Being a human being territorially, it is so ingrained in our existence, the necessity to fight, even if it's fighting through words and concepts and mythologies. And it's fascinating to kind of, to really, for me anyways, to kind of take that in to recognize. But I mean, can we do it without violence? and we do it tactically without violence. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I just want to say something because I think it kind of ties back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I'm just I'm really appreciating Ryan's voice in this particular part of the dialogue, because if I think back to Ryan not going through the journey he went to, he wouldn't be here sharing that voice, and that voice kind of cuts through what we're talking about and presents it in a way that is really clear. And so I appreciate that Ryan is now out in the world doing that work and helping to bridge that divide between these other levels of this conversation. And we got to experience that here.
And I want to
Yeah.
highlight something key that Ryan said as part of the equation, is that as a male, he did not know love that wasn't tied to sexuality. And so for the energy of the feminine inner child and the feminine divine mother to come in and touch the heart of man, that is how it's a necessary ingredient for the alchemy of where we're going in society. So if you look at the last few thousand years, the leaders, you could say, have not been touched by the magic and the love in the heart of the divine feminine. Okay, now we have masculine leaders, lots of warring, lots of fighting, lots of ego. Okay, where we're going, the return of the divine feminine, the Satya Yuga, it is the mother's energy, the feminine in that balance, the alchemy, coming back online. And now we start to create in a different way. Now we see the wound that causes someone to act like a big mean bear or whatever, however it expresses. And we see that we're all inner children that need love, need to be seen, need to be good, to be seen as good. So I see that, like, that piece touched Ryan. That brought his voice, that brought a new spiral of his warriorship into the world to express. And the world is ready for it. It's needing it, but it's also at the same time confronting those that have not yet been touched, the old paradigm.
And we have something else here in addition to that. You're surrounded by these 3 white people in this conversation. What is that like?
I have a very interesting way that I'm walking back into my Indigenous heritage, and it's one that I'm still very curious about. I find it fascinating that my spiritual and land connection comes from people that are not Indigenous. And the gifts, the really, really great gifts that I'm getting are also not coming from Indigenous people, but they're Indigenous gifts. And so I flipped that all around as well, that it, again, I'm trying to break away from what the shell means or doesn't mean. The shell is just the shell. You can have a person that is completely connected to the land and completely understands Indigenous protocol and is not Indigenous. You can also have someone that is completely Indigenous that has no idea what those protocols mean or the importance of them. And so when I'm trying not to look at who I'm sitting around anymore, as best I can in that way that you're speaking of, Mark. I'm trying to get through that. So I actually, in sitting in front of the 3 of you, had no thought one way or another about it.
Mm-hmm. I know. It didn't really occur to me until now.
Yeah.
And it was actually because of the way that the layout is on the screen, where I saw you were kind of in the middle of us. And it was like, oh, interesting. But yeah, you don't think about it because we're
that's
just
how
buddies.
I live most of my life. Yeah, that's how I live most of my life. I'm usually out talking to people that are not Indigenous and sort of sharing and showing and teaching.
Yeah.
That's sort of how this is played out.
And it somehow mysteriously is relevant. It would be, when I can feel the energy of the mountains, when I'm driving through Kamloops. I was there yesterday. Like the hills there, they really speak to me. There's certain groups of mountains or hills like across or somewhere in the middle ground that really jump out, the energy of it. And it's mountain energy. So the tree can talk about the mountain, but do you want the tree to talk about the mountain, or do you want the mountain to talk about the mountain? And what I'm speaking about specifically here, and this is just an analogy for being authentically Indigenous. It is a shell, but there's something deeper also. And you're half white, half Indigenous. My heritage it's all what we call white. I'm actually not white. If you look closely, it's not. This is not white. White is behind me. This is not white. Going back to the roots, all of us have Indigenous roots. It's a complicated a nuanced concept. If you're white, it does indicate that your ancestors haven't lived here for long. But if you were born here, that is relevant. But if you were born into a colonized construct, that's also relevant. If you have ancestors in this ground, in this land, who are a part of a tradition, that has a resonance, that has meaning, that has value, that's also important. That means that you have a familial connection to energy that's going to be, it's all relevant, but it's also a mystery, and it's one step at a time. Any closing words from anybody before we, from each of us, let's say?
Well, I'd love to answer what you were just talking about there, because I recently found out that my ancestry is different than what I thought it was. And so I'm just about half Indigenous. I'm a very, very small amount French, and I'm just about half British, and then I'm smaller amounts Irish and Scottish. And so when I take a step back and I look at that, I think it helps. I think it shines a light on something. And that is that just because you're white doesn't mean that you didn't have the colonial construct come in and take over your way of being and your ancestry. And so for me, I'm French and British, which are the colonizers, and I'm Irish, Scottish, and Indigenous, and they were all colonized. And so just because you were white doesn't mean that you weren't colonized at one point. And so if you have these things that are going on within you where you kind of feel that connection to the Indigenous way and what's happening in Canada right now, you should probably do a little bit of research on your lineage and see if you're aligning with them, because there's something that happened in your past as well around this, because you don't just need to be an Indigenous nation to have had this happen. And so, I think that's a key point of sort of distinction, is that, I'm the colonizer and the colonized, but it's actually a lot more complex than I thought it was originally, because now I've got 3 different nations that have been colonized within me. Right.
Right. So you're the colonizer, but then you're also the colonized, and then you're also the colonized, and you're also the colonized, if you take all of those into account. I mean, how many people don't know that, would you say? Like the settlers, the white people, or whatever you want to call them, the assimilated people, how many of them don't know that they have been colonized, and their nervous system, their orientation, the way they view the world isn't a part of being colonized?
I would say that 99% of the people that don't look Indigenous in any way, shape, or form, or would be considered white, consider themselves the colonizer.
If anything at all.
Like most don't look back. Most
context.
don't look back and go, "Oh, hey, right, yeah," because I think they look at it from I'm a Canadian, right, perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So isn't that highly problematic?
Not once we get the truth of it out. Not once people hear it, but yeah, it's going to be until they do.
Right. Yeah, it seems to be the first point on the agenda is increase the visibility of the damage that's come from being colonized, being a part of an assimilated culture, which Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with Wolves, a young analyst, doesn't use the terminology we're using. She would say overcultured, but it's ultimately the same thing. It's being beaten over the head with a construct in order to behave a certain way. And there being aspects of in upbringing and being cultured, that, part of being assimilated, fear that comes up as children, trauma that's stored, all those things that we're becoming more and more aware of. We're talking about the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, any closing statements, comments, questions?
I can go first. I just think it's been a really valuable conversation on so many levels. It's great to highlight Ryan and his journey, and to reflect back on being a part of that journey. And it's also important, I think, to consider that Gaia and myself were not the only 2 people that supported Ryan on that journey. There was many, many others who supported and created and gave magic, and like it takes a village. And I think that ties back into the theme of this podcast. Like you, Ryan, stepped into a village of people that supported you on your healing journey and helped you to get back out into the world. And I think it's important to acknowledge all of those people that were involved in that journey. And the result is that, one of the things that I'm reflecting on is, wow, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago when we met. And that's cool too. Like we're all in this process of learning and growing, and we help each other grow on this experience. And that's one of the things that I've experienced with you, Ryan. We've touched base in different healing ceremonies and had pretty unique experiences, and I've been there for you, you've been there for me, and it's just a beautiful thing that had I not made that effort to maintain this connection, we wouldn't have had those experiences. So I'm grateful for all of it and grateful for each of you and the interconnectivity of our relationships and how it's played out. It's pretty cool. So thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate having 4 voices because there's 4 different perspectives that get put into the center. Ross bringing in all the other souls that were part of Ryan's journey, even that, like being able to voice that and putting that in the center. It's like, yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. You know, this is the new paradigm of leadership and connection, is this co-creation. That who is the leader? We are all the leader of our own experience. We all have direct revelation, our own unique experience with our creator within, without, and how it moves us in the world. And we all have the same soul journey of deconstructing the colonization, we can call it, the limiting belief programs, the sediment of distortion. Like, we are all on that journey of freeing ourselves so that we can truly be the new human being, you know, which is just a whole empathetic, heart-led, well-contained expression of the creator here on earth. And yeah, thank you to Mark for creating a container for these voices to be heard.
You're very welcome. Ryan, anything else?
I think it's really interesting that at the beginning of this, and I don't know if it was happening during the podcast or if it was during our pre-talk, but Gaia, you were talking about, you originally sort of put it out into the universe to be around some divine feminine and get that voice out. And I find it really interesting that you ended up with 3 men that I think all are aware of their divine feminine, funny enough. But you end up in these 3 men around you, and then we have these unbelievable conversations that just wrap through both the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and it just layered on top of each other throughout the entire process. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to highlight that. I thought that was really, really interesting, and I think it was really beautiful. I couldn't thank you guys enough for being with me during this conversation and being with me during this journey. Yeah, I feel very, very blessed to be sitting with the 3 of you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's powerful to sit in circle. There's sort of like a council in a sense that we've kind of created, even if it's just counseling each other, sharing ideas. If there's other people, you know, that these ideas resonate for, and they can feel a little bit less alone in the world, or a little bit, you know, bring coherence to certain concepts or ideas of self and their own journey, then fabulous. But it's also something that's being cultivated just with each other. So the human aspect. And I would add one thing to the description of the new human, Tara. I would say the wild man or the wild woman. It's that women, you know, the concept of the women that run with wolves, that permission to be wild, and to. I think it's really important to not lose that, to not lose touch, our connection with that also. But it's all connected to everything else that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was fabulous. There's something brewing. I really feel like this is the beginning of a new chapter for me. I have some ideas about what that next creation sort of looks like, and you know, I'm hoping that Ryan's a part of it, and that connection between the divinity and the indigenous and everything in between, the sacred village that lies in between, and how we get there and how we form that and create that, co-create that with all the things in mind, all the aspects of self, and yeah, the human condition. Thank you to the listeners, people that were tuning in today, for spending your time connecting, you know, with these concepts. And, you know, we're hoping that that many of these ideas are landing for other people as we explore them, and we're called to share them in this way, which is, you know, it's a beautiful thing for us. And yeah, I will end it at that. Sacred Village Podcast. This is Mark A. Lewis, over and out.
I lay my head down.
Check out my lovely partner's music, Kristina Jessen, at KristinaJessen.com. And there's also more information on what we're doing. We're doing a land project up here, traditional land development with a community intention. And if you're interested in any of the retreats that we're a part of and part of organizing, you
can find all that information at sacredvillagepodcast.com. Have a wonderful day.
Floated down and down like a feather. I floated down and down, and I floated down and down like a feather.